Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a session on handling customer interaction. With me, I have the beautiful Arunima Kamat with a new haircut. Arunima, did you have this new haircut for the last class that we shot?
Wanted to go out with a bang.
Oh,
Sick.
wanted to go out. Yep. Last few classes, Arunima's haircut is looking really nice. Everybody's giving her a lot of compliments. I cut my hair really short, but now my
You
hair has
did.
grown a little, so it's not looking as good. But anyway, we're shooting again after a bit, Arunima. The last class, I think it's been close to 7-10 days after shooting classes every alternate day. I miss doing these things and I miss putting these classes out. But here we are, handling customer interactions, right? Very interesting topic, like all topics are. Now, let's get right into it. What is meant by great customer service, right? What does it mean? Customer service is the support we offer our customers and clients that helps them have an easy and enjoyable experience with us, right? That's what it is, what great customer service is. And it's got many aspects that we're going to discuss through this class, and then we're going to focus and hone in particular around the entire bit of customer communication or customer interaction, right? That's going to be the core of what we're going to discuss, right? So let's kind of jump into an exercise. Let's jog your mind a little. What is Why is it important to provide great customer service? Share any 3 to 5 points. Pause the video here. Share any 3 to 5 points that come to your mind, and put those points down. We'll have a discussion. You can have that discussion with your coach as well. Right now, the importance of providing great customer services. Number one. Okay, before we go into like all these elements, right? I think the first and foremost kind of thing to remember as far as customer service is concerned is that the customer is the person that's putting the bread on my table, on your table, on everybody's table, right? The customer is the person putting the bread on the table, right? And sometimes that is very difficult for a person to understand, fathom, or realize in a way, because if you are working in, say, the admin department in your company, right, it'll never really come to your mind that the customer is the one putting the bread on your table, right? Because in a lot of cases you're not even interacting with the customer directly. You could be part of the IT team, for example, right? And you're not really interacting with the customer directly, but in the end, uh, you're not di- interacting with the external customer directly, but in the end, the customer who is the one that puts the bread on your table, right? And therefore, the biggest, the most reputed companies are the ones that have mastered the art of understanding the customer, mastered the art of creating products that customers want, mastered the art in turn of giving great customer service to people, right? That's what the world's best companies have mastered. And that's something which is, in my opinion, extremely important for any kind of professional success, right? So of course, when you're talking about customers, there are two kinds of customers, right? There's one is the external customer, the customer that's paying you the money for your products or your services, or in certain cases like Facebook, right? We are Facebook's customers in a way, but we're not really paying them for it. And then there's the internal customer, right? So the internal customer is, if you're part of the HR team in your organization, your internal people are your customers. You're called your internal customers. So something which I harp on at all points of time is to say that, literally, it's every person in every organization has to serve a customer, right? That customer could be an external customer, or that customer could be an internal customer, but you're going to all work is around serving some customer or the other, right? So if you are not going to be good at dealing with customers, interacting with customers, communicating with customers, handling customers, if you're not going to be great at that, that's all the work, right? It's very difficult for you to kind of succeed professionally, right? So very important point that's why this subject is so important. All your work is service, and whether it's the internal or external customer, you're always, that's what your work is going to be. So you need to know how to deal with them, interact, communicate with them well, right? So that's the other way of looking at the importance of it. So yeah, if you interact and provide great customer service, you will stand out from your competition, you will retain customers through goodwill, you will increase, there'll be an increase in customer loyalty towards you, there'll be good word of mouth publicity, and of course, most importantly, there'll be growth in your sales, there'll be growth in your revenue as well, right? Now, a bunch of statistics, of course, this seems like it's very, very obvious, but some good statistics towards this. Customers are willing to spend 17% more on a company that has outstanding customer service. 77% of customers would recommend a brand to a friend after having a single positive experience. Wow, that's crazy. 93% of customers are likely to make repeat purchases with companies who offer excellent customer service, and 90% of Americans use customer service as a factor in deciding whether or not to do business with a company, right? So this is absolutely crazy statistics, and that tells you the importance of really knowing, how to work, how to deal with customers. Yes, Arunima Kamat.
I also believe I read this somewhere that it's cheaper to retain customers through good customer service than get newer customers on board. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. It's both. The statistics that you spoke about is a correct statistic. We may not know the
Mm-hmm.
exact figure, but even
Right.
if you use your common sense, right, your common sense is going to tell you that if you have an existing customer and you have a new customer, right, now how do you need to get a
Correct.
new customer? A new customer takes money to get, and that
Market.
money could be in terms of marketing money, and it could be in terms of sales money, right, that you need to spend
Mm-hmm.
to acquire a new customer. You've already
Correct.
done that, and he's become your existing customer, right? So now what you want to do
Correct.
with that existing customer is giving great customer service, so you can, in a way, he keeps buying your product or service, right? Plus he gives you word of mouth, right? He tells people that
Correct.
whatever, which if you have word of mouth, it becomes much easier for you to kind of sell or market a product. And all of us know this is just common
Correct.
sense. If a friend comes and tells you that, hey,
Correct.
this phone is absolutely awesome, and everything about this phone is great, and you look at it and you get a recommendation, then when you go into the shop to buy a phone, the process of a person selling that phone to you is very, very simple, as against to you having
Correct.
no word of mouth, right, for it.
Correct.
So absolutely true on like every parameter. And just coming back to the thing that all work is dealing with a customer, internal or external
Yeah.
customer, right? So the minute that goes in your head and you really understand that that is the truth, you need to know, if all work is about this, then I really need to get my act together and know how to deal with these different customers, whether they're
Correct.
internal or external, right? So I
Correct.
think that's a good logic.
And I think in terms of external customers, if you're giving them great service, then you're obviously earning money because they'll keep
Yeah,
coming back to you for more business. And with
yeah.
internal customers, you can get your work done more quickly, more efficiently because you've given such good internal service to them. So you have
Yeah,
great
yeah, yeah.
relationships with them.
Yeah. And in the end, how you serve, Arunima, the internal customer has a direct impact on how the external customer is served, right? It's
Correct.
that simple.
Correct.
That there is that kind of rolling effect that happens on the external customer as well. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so both customers need to be treated well, whether it's internal or external, just does not matter,
Correct.
right? And that's important, right? Now, in as far as customer service is concerned, there is this important concept which is called the moment of truth. If you've been through customer service trainings, you would have found this, that the moment of truth is spoken about a lot. Jan Carlson joined Scandinavian Airline as its CEO when it was in deep losses. Within 2.5 years, he turned it around into a profit-making organization by delightful customer service, right? This concept has been successfully applied and used by millions of companies to achieve great customer service, right? Now, this is very, very important. Okay, the moment of truth is the customer's interaction with any aspect of an organization. Each touch point gives the customer a chance to form a good, neutral, or bad impression about the organization, right? I think this is a critical part. Okay, so let me repeat this. Moment of truth is a customer's interaction with any aspect of an organization. Each touch point gives the customer a chance to form a good, neutral, or bad impression about the organization, right? Now, very simple. What does this mean? Let's just take a bank, for example. Okay. So when it comes to a bank, um, every interaction of yours with that bank is a moment of truth, right? Now, that interaction that you have with the bank can be at the ATM, it can be on their app, it could be on their website, right? It could be at their branch, it could be when their relationship manager possibly comes to your house, right? It doesn't matter. It's not always about interacting with a human. That's not what moment of truth is about. You, anytime that you interact with the company in some way, right? So when you go to the ATM, you're interacting with that brand. When you're going to their app, you're interacting with that brand. When you're interacting with that brand. Right now, every time you interact with the brand, whether you know it or not, on a conscious or subconscious level, you start making certain kind of impressions of it, right? And they could be good, bad, or neutral, and that's what ends up happening. So if you have a lot of good impressions, right, of the bank, then you have a extremely loyal customer, right? Because over the years, irrespective of where he goes, he has very, very positive interactions with them, he becomes a loyal customer, right? Then if he has a lot of positive interactions with the bank, once in a while if he has a negative interaction with you, he's ready to tolerate that negative interaction once in a while. On the other side, if he has lots of negative interactions with the company, with the brand, if he has lots of them, then he wants to stop being your customer, right? Right, when this happens, when he has lots of positive, then the word of mouth happens, then he gives you more business, so on and so forth, right? So that's what kind of tends to happen when you have lots of good impressions, right? So your job, if you say you run your own business, if you're in control of the entire environment that the customer interacts with you, what your job is to ensure that each and every aspect of you dealing with the customer, right, there is a positive impression that is formed, right? And if you cannot control all the other things, at least when the customer is interacting with you in any form, that interaction could be an email, that interaction could be a verbal interaction, the interaction could be a physical interaction, at least when he's interacting with the human, which is you, make that extremely positive for him, right? So because in a lot of cases when you're working for a, especially a larger setup, let's just take a bank again, you can't really control what's going to happen on the company app, you can't control what's going to happen on their website, you can't control what's going to happen at the ATM, but you can definitely control what's going to happen when the customer interacts with you, right? When there's a people to people interaction, that can be controlled, and often that is the most important one of all these things, right? Because customers are more willing to accept glitches that may happen on your app, right? It'll irritate them, but they're willing to in a way say that, okay, it's a technical error. But when they interact with a human being on the other side, and that human being doesn't interact well with them, that's when the brand gets a really bad impression, right? So this is what moment of truth really means. Yes, Arunima.
Just to add an example here, so I remember a couple of years back, I was facing an issue with my Apple device,
Yeah.
and ultimately, at that point I couldn't get an immediate resolution, but it's still one of my favorite, in a way, interactions with the customer service personnel, because the way the representative interacted with me,
Yeah.
made small talk, was really polite.
Yeah.
I could tell that he's really trying his best to help me out, although there were things that he wasn't able to give me a solution for. Like I said, I didn't get the resolution. So what I called for, I didn't get my end objective, but I still enjoyed that interaction. And I would remember, it was more than a couple of years back. It would have been almost 5-6 years back. And I still remember it, and I would still tell other people about it, because it had such a huge impression on me as a customer, the
Yeah.
way he interacted with me in those 15 minutes that he spoke.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really goes to show how important that customer interaction is.
Correct. I'm glad that you shared that. Let me share another example with you, right? And I'll share this example because this is a statistic that I read, and I also experienced this firsthand. So there's anecdotal evidence for it, and there's kind of database evidence for it, right? So the database evidence says that in hospitals and in healthcare, the actual health outcome of the patient has got nothing to do with his satisfaction scores,
Got it.
right? So the actual health outcome has got nothing to do with the satisfaction scores. What that means is that the person goes into a hospital, say, with a certain ailment, right? And it's the kind of ailment that the hospital can't get you rid of that ailment for whatever reason, right? And you still kind of walk out still with that ailment being there, and some medicines given. The patient is not going to fault you for it, or is not going to be angry for you, as long as he was treated
Right.
really well at that hospital, right?
Correct.
As long as he was dealt with brilliantly by that hospital. And that's the whole kind of the reason why nurse training becomes so important, is the reason why doctor
Correct.
training becomes so important in terms of their patient, who's their customer interactions, and how they go about doing that. And all of us have experienced this at some point of time, even if we weren't admitted to the hospital. But if a relative of ours was there and we went there, the interaction of the doctor, patients, and the staff there has a huge bearing on our customer satisfaction. And it's not really the actual health outcome of the person, right? You're not
Yeah.
going to blame them for it. We've had situations in the past, this may sound bad, but we've had situations in the past where a relative of ours has been at a hospital, and of course slightly older in age, has passed away in that hospital, right? But we would still go back with positive feelings about the hospital if they
Correct.
treated us well and they treated the patient well, right? We're not going to come back and
Correct.
say, oh, we lost our relative, this is a terrible hospital. We do that if they didn't
Correct.
treat you well, right? And then what happened was, this was now close to 10 years back, and I recall this incident where somebody elder in our family, was admitted to a hospital. And again, as it happened, they didn't get cured of the ailment that they went there for, right? Because it was an ailment that you couldn't really cure a person of. But when she came out of the hospital, she said, "Sabko jana chahiye yahan pe ek baar," right? Because they treated her so well, right? And they
Correct.
literally, sir pe bitha diya kind of a thing, right? They really took
Correct.
great care of her, the nurses, the patients, the bond word that was there. And the exact experience that you spoke about, that you had in an Apple store, it's the exact experience in something which is a lot more serious, as a actual
Yes.
health problem, hospital. But the end result is the same, right?
Correct.
That's because all human beings kind of behave in that same way,
Right.
depending on what happens, right? I'll share another thing with you, which is something that we've covered later on, right? Let's take that same hospital example where the nurse, she was very courteous, very polite, but she didn't seem like she knew anything that she was doing, right? That still piss you off, right? You get what I'm trying to say? So
Right.
it's not just about being polite.
Correct.
It's about saying that, okay, the nurse that came, she was polite, she was courteous, she knew what she was doing, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I didn't get the final outcome that I want. That's okay, right? But it wasn't somebody that was just mumbling away to glory and didn't know their stuff, and
Correct.
and kind of made everybody more nervous through the nurse's presence because
Correct.
she didn't know something, right? So again, that aspect of kind of dealing with your patient, customer, client becomes so important, right? Even if you're courteous, but if you don't know your stuff, it's not going to have that impact,
Yeah.
right? And that's what
Absolutely.
moment of truth really means. And that's, I think, the importance, especially of person to person interaction,
Yes.
right? Because like I said, you can forgive the app, but if the person is arrogant, if the person doesn't deal with you well, that is something that human beings don't like
Correct.
that much, right? Now, very important concept, right? Moment of truth. What is an average moment of truth, right? An average moment of truth is, the customer is expecting something, right? What the customer expects, and the customer gets that, right? So in a way, here he is satisfied, right? Because he has an expectation, the expectation gets served. This is good, right? This is satisfied. Now, this is where it's called a moment of misery, right? Where the customer has a certain expectation, and what the customer gets is this. So in this case, he is dissatisfied, right? He's dissatisfied because there's a gap between what he expects and what he wants. And on the other side, this is a moment of magic, right? When the customer expects a certain thing and the customer gets more than that. So this is a place where he is, delighted with what is happening, right? Because what he's getting is far more than what his expectations are, right? So this is the things that you need to remember. So that's why all your customer service in the way can be divided into, all your customer interactions can be divided into saying, okay, are you dissatisfied, are you satisfied, or are you delighted, right? And more often than not, we need to be in this category, right? We need to be between satisfied and delighted is what we need to try to do, because sure, it's not possible for us to exceed customer expectations in all our interactions with them, but at least we need to meet them for every interaction, and as where possible we need to exceed them, right? So this is what you need to remember as far as your moment of truth is concerned. Yes, Arunima.
I have a couple of examples here. So just to illustrate the difference between like the satisfaction and being delighted, I had done a project where I had to call up, interact with customer service of different companies from different industries. Now, if you just take banking, there was one company which gave me a resolution, and I was okay with it. It was very quick. It was barely, I think, a minute long interaction, and I got my resolution, and I was
Yeah,
perfectly okay.
you're
But it was
satisfied.
nothing special. I mean, yeah, it
Yeah,
was nothing special. I
yeah,
knew that this person gave me what I was looking for, and that's
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Whereas I think it was American Express,
yeah,
who same situation,
yeah,
but it is a slightly longer call. Maybe it was a call
yeah,
which lasted for 2.5 to 3 minutes, which is double
yeah,
the time. Same resolution, but world apart in terms of the service, because the way that person spoke to me,
yeah.
and she went above and beyond the roles. I think the question was like, can I travel with a pet? Or I'm so sorry, that's a different example.
Mm,
But basically, the she went and she said, okay, I looked it up and I'll give you some more solutions for this, because I
got it.
can't give you a resolution.
Got it.
So the point being, same situation, but in one place I got a satisfactory, like I got what I wanted, but I'm like, okay, cool. I
Yeah,
didn't think about it too much, and
yeah,
I kept
yeah,
thinking about and replaying the American Express interaction,
yeah,
because it was such an amazing sort of interaction for
yeah,
me, an
yeah,
experience for me. So it was a
yeah.
moment of average moment of truth versus a moment of magic,
Absolutely.
um,
I think that's a great
between like two
example.
banks.
Correct. And
Yeah,
I also think that, it's even in a short interaction, right? Let's, as you said, okay, it was a 2 to 3 minute interaction with American Express. Maybe it was a little more, but even in a short interaction, you can really make a good positive impact with the
correct,
customer, right? And this
correct.
kind of, goes into the next slide that we're going to talk about. Did you have another example, Arunima? That
I did.
Yeah,
Similarly, in airlines, I think it
yeah,
was Indigo versus the Star, or some
yeah,
of the which same,
yeah,
where one person said, I can't do much about it, and I knew that this person couldn't do much, but it made me a little upset,
yeah.
because I was like, look, you're not even trying really.
Mm,
And again, same situation, and
mm,
even this airline couldn't do much about it, but
mm,
again, the person went above and beyond, said that, what, let me look it up and make my trip. I can get you something else.
mm,
Didn't have to do that, but because they went that extra mile,
mm.
again, I then after that, I literally, and this is again going back to what the stats we shared, I came back and I told my father, we're only traveling by Vistara from
Mm,
here on, because of
mm.
that one interaction over a call for a project.
Yeah,
Right, it didn't even have to do anything with my
yeah,
travel
yeah,
plans,
yeah,
but I came back and said, I'm only traveling with Vistara from now on, because
yeah,
that interaction meant so much to me.
yeah, yeah. And this is how most people react, by the way, right? And that's
Yeah,
why, again, and you think, let's take back the example, right? So sure, your company website, app, all those things are very important to make them user friendly, right? User friendly,
correct.
making them customer friendly. Is very, very important. There's no denying that, because today you have customers interacting so much with brands over, websites, over apps, where they're not really talking to
Mhm.
people. But boy, does it make a difference when you actually pick the phone and you talk to people, and that interaction when you talk to them has such a big impact, which is far more than what would happen if
Correct,
you just went online and kind of did that, right? So
correct.
in a way, never.
Also, I believe,
Yeah, yeah, go
I'm
on.
so sorry. I believe there's a big chunk of people, especially perhaps an older generation, who still
Yeah,
call,
yeah,
because maybe younger people are more familiar with technology, tend to use these apps and get their resolution a
yeah,
lot quicker. But
yeah,
you still have like a demographic which is interacting via call, and
yeah,
you have to still cater to them and give them good interaction, like a
yeah.
good experience through your interaction with them.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. Right, good, amazing, very nice points, Arima, nice examples. Yeah, so this is something which is important, right? So when we're creating this content, we spend quite a lot of time discussing this thing, because even for us, having done this for so many years, this is so interesting, right? Now, please remember this if you want to interact with customers well. different customers have different expectations, right? So now remember what happened in the last slide. We said there is a customer expectation. If you go above the customer expectation, you are delighting the customer. If you meet it, you're satisfying them. If you don't, you're dissatisfying them, right? But if you look at this, it all depends on this one thing, which is your customer expectation, right? Now this customer expectation is different for different people. It's different for different people, right? So literally each and every customer has a different expectation. Now where does that expectation comes from? The different expectations that people have comes from their past experiences largely, right? And those past experiences could be with, your brand, okay, or just historic past experiences with all kind of things connected to that, which now this makes stuff damn interesting, right? um Now, so I give this example always when I'm conducting a workshop. Two customers staying at Holiday Inn, right? So I say, okay, let's assume that it's the Holiday Inn, and the room is room 401, right? This is the room that we're talking about in the picture. Now, yesterday, there was a person that came to stay at room 401 at the Holiday Inn in Andheri, right? And when this person entered the room, this person was absolutely ecstatic and delighted about the quality of the room, right? That was, he entered the room and he, like, he was with his friend and they actually hugged each other and they're like, man, this is a fantastic room and we're so happy to be spending our night here, right? So this is what happened. 401, yesterday, right? And of course they check out today at 12 o'clock. They check out after spending the night there, extremely happy. Right now today, there's another two people that check into the same room, 401, right? Now when they check into 401 today, the people that check in here are absolutely dissatisfied with the room, right? They enter the room and they're like, what the hell, what kind of a room is this, right? And they're absolutely dissatisfied with the room. Now think of it, the room is absolutely the same, right? But one person, you know a couple of people came into the room and were absolutely delighted by it, and a couple of people were dissatisfied by it, right? Now how did that happen? Now the people that checked into the room yesterday, they were delighted because they were possibly, they were used to staying at a Oyo or a lower to mid kind of brand hotel, right? That's where they were probably used to staying, and a Holiday Inn is far superior to Oyo hotels, right, which they typically stay in. So therefore they're delighted, right? And maybe the people that are dissatisfied, they are used to staying at the Oberoi, right, or the Leela. They're used to staying at probably 5 7 star hotels, right? And when they come to the Holiday Inn, they are going to be dissatisfied. And I thought of this example because this would happen with me and my cousin, right? I have a cousin that, much older to me, but he works at this international firm. And so when he's traveling so much. He's traveling 20 days a month, so he's often staying at the best of the best hotels, right? So when if he's booked at a Holiday Inn, he will come into that Holiday Inn and he'll throw a fit. He'll say, what kind of hotel is there, because he's so used to staying, right? When I would typically go with him, and for me, Holiday Inn, I'm like, hey, Holiday Inn is great. I'd be between satisfied, maybe not delighted, but at least fully satisfied, because those are the kind of quality of hotels that I am used to staying, right? Nobody's booking me at an Oberoi or Leela, right? And I would be kind of satisfied with that, but he would throw a fit when it would come to that. And the room would be the same, but both of us would react differently, purely based on our expectations, and our expectations come from our past experiences, right? So that is so interesting. Now, um, why this point is so important for you, right? And the simple reason why this point is so important is every time you have a customer that is not satisfied with you, you need to remember that largely that customer is not satisfied with you because of his past experiences. You cannot look at at that customer as a villain, or that for that because that customer is being painful. Sure, you have a bunch of customers that are painful, and they're painful largely for the sake of being painful, but that's not the case with the bulk of people, right? The bulk of people have just had another experience. Now, let me give you another example, right? So let's just take the example that she cited, which is of Apple, right? And then now Arunima has had a really good experience at Apple, right? In the way they dealt with her, right? So now her expectations of Apple have gone up. Right now, she's expecting that kind of service because she's got that kind of service. Now, let's assume that something goes wrong with Arunima's phone now, and she goes to Apple again, and now of course she's interacting with another person at Apple, and that person, he doesn't treat her badly but gives her an average kind of interaction, right? Now, because Arunima's expectations are up, although there was an average interaction, she will still feel a sense of, I won't say dissatisfied, but yeah, she'll be somewhere on those lines because the expectations of that brand is up, and now what is done is dissatisfied her in a way, right? And it's that simple. Now think of it, the brand is the same, but she's interacted with two people, and because this one person raised her expectation, the other person now is going to end up disappointing her. And that's why it's so important for every company and every person within the company to keep the bar, or at least keep pushing the bar on what great customer service would be, right? That's what you need to do, keep raising the bar or keep pushing the bar on that. Okay, does that make sense? Right now, the other kind of thing is, your customer expectations often is based on how things are marketed to you, right? So if a certain product is marketed to you saying that, oh, this is absolutely going to change your life, and most kind of products are marketed to you that way because they want you to buy the product, and when you buy the product, that thing doesn't happen, right? And that often leads to in a way some kind of dissatisfaction, right? And this is true even of politicians and politics, right? Because the very nice quote that says, politicians campaign in poetry and they govern in prose, right? So which means that when they're doing their campaigning, they'll give big promises, but when they actually start governing, it's sometimes not possible to keep up to those promises and those kind of uh, nice sounding words that are easy to speak during a campaign, right? And then that often leads to their satisfaction scores going down, right? Now, sure, as customers, all of us know that every time we see something which says, oh, this is going to make you thin within this much time, we take everything with a pinch of salt because we're so used to being marketed by people. But still, that is another reason why our expectations go up. And when our expectations go up, our whether we're delighted, satisfied, or dissatisfied is going to depend on that, right? Now, the other thing is that you have to remember that customer expectations keep going up, right? Whether you like it or not, customer expectations keep going up. And the example that I give here is of Uber and Ola, because I have faced this myself, right? So I've been kind of traveling extensively now for at least across India for at least 10 to 12 years, right? So I used to go and live in Gurgaon quite a bit. And Gurgaon back then, before Ola and Uber, it was so difficult to get taxis, book taxis, do all those things, right? Then when Uber and Ola came in, it became so easy to book a taxi, right? So we just click a button and then we'd say, oh wow, this is this is amazing, right? And why is this amazing? Because I'm clicking a button and a taxi is coming within 15 to 20 minutes. We'd be like, wow, man, this is outstanding, right? So this is when Ola and Uber first came in. 15 to 20 minutes was great, right? Was changed our world in a way when we were in Gurgaon. um, Today, if we open the app and we see that the cab is 15 to 20 minutes away, we say, yaar kya ye Uber Ola, ye kya chal raha hai yaar, so bad their services, and we complain about them being 15 to 20 minutes away, right? Because we are expecting them to be 5 minutes away, 8 minutes away, 10 minutes away, right? Now, why has that happened? Because our expectations of them have gone up, right? And why have they gone up? It's a consequence of competition sometimes, right? If Ola is giving it within 20 minutes, Uber said, okay, let me make it 15 minutes. So when they made it 15 minutes, somebody would have said, okay, now we need to push for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And that's what a capitalist society in a way does for you, right? Where there is a lot of competition. If these two people didn't do it, a Meru would probably come and try to do it, right? And that's why everybody needs to keep improving their game, upping their game, right? And that's why whether you like it or not, customer expectations of you, of your brand, just in general, are going to keep going up, right? They're going to keep going up, and that's something that you can't stop, can't change, and that's why our ability and the way we give service needs to keep going up. Right now, let me just share another thing. One of the, these brands like Amazon, right, Flipkart, they've had a huge kind of impact on customer service in general, not just customer service when it comes to e-commerce. Because when you order something of Amazon, if you want to return it, it's literally no questions asked, right? You just click a button and you can return something, right? And people are now looking for that same ease of customer service when they go to banks, when they go to insurance companies, when they go to a mutual fund company, when they go to a hospital, when you go to that. And a lot of these people haven't upped their game as much as a lot of these technology and e-commerce companies are concerned, right? They haven't upped their game. And customers are often just comparing those brands to these brands, right? And they're falling short of it, which is leading to, again, people being dissatisfied or disappointed in a way with them, right? So that's something that we need to remember, that all customer expectations are going to keep going up whether you like it or not, right? Yes, Arunima.
Yeah, I so just to add to what you said, I think every time someone makes a process simpler for us,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
expect that then from
yeah,
everything else. And
yeah,
I think almost naturally, because you think that, oh, if this person can do it, why can't this company do it?
yeah, yeah,
So the moment there's anything a little different or complicated versus which you were perfectly happy with earlier,
yeah,
now that you've experienced something a little better, you're
yeah,
not willing. As customers, we are very rarely willing to go back to the
yeah.
way of being earlier.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think like the Uber example, I had another one. So when I would work with DHL, I would have to take a Uber from Ghatkopar back home.
Yeah.
And often the first few, I think, weeks, it would take me a long time. It would take me about 10 minutes or so, and I had no problem.
Mm.
Once I got an Uber literally in like 2 minutes. I mean, not even two. I booked the cab, and the cab just came. He happened to be around. And from literally the next day, when it again showed the wait time is 80 minutes, I was actually frustrated because
Yeah.
and I was thinking I've had such a long day at work and I have to wait for 8 minutes just because of that one instance when the
Yeah.
cab came almost immediately.
Yeah.
Again, the repercussion of that, I remember calling my friend from the cab saying, "My God, like the cab just immediately arrived. It was such a great." Delightful moment for me that I didn't have to
Yeah.
wait at all. I got
Yeah.
off the metro and the cab was just there. And then literally the day up, just 24 hours later, I was again
Yeah.
frustrated and I had
Yeah.
like a moment of misery in a way,
Yeah.
where when my cab took the same amount of time to take all other days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just shows how fickle in a way customers are, and in
Yeah.
terms of their expectations, I would totally admit that about myself.
Yeah. And everyone,
And
it's not just you.
yeah,
It's universal in
correct,
nature, right? It's absolutely
correct,
universal in nature, and that's what I think each and every company needs to keep that in mind while operating.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because every time you experience anything, you go any place, any restaurant, you
Yeah.
experience anything good,
Yeah.
you think about it and you're like, oh, now I need this everywhere. It just
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
becomes like, how was I living without something like this, without a service
Absolutely.
like this?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's incredible. I didn't realize how important customer service is, but the more I think about it, it really is eye opening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, great customer service is a win-win for everyone, right? So that's the thing that you need to remember, right? So when you do great customer service, of course your customer wins, right? He's happy with it. When you do great customer service, you are going to benefit from it, right? Because if there's anything where you need to say cross sell a product, right, or if the customer is giving you some rating, as it's done so often, you'll get a good rating. When you do great customer service, the company benefits, right, from it as well, because then there's going to be repeat business, there's going to be new business that's going to come. So customer service really creates a great win-win for everyone, right? And I often end up telling people that although customer service creates a great win-win for everyone, you see so many situations where people still don't do great customer service, right? And the example that I love giving is a restaurant and a waiter. Right now, in any restaurant, any waiter that's worked for a while knows that if he gives great customer service, if he does that, his tip is going to be higher, right? every waiter, if they little have a little bit of common sense, knows that their tip is going to be higher. And most waiters, it's not like they come from a higher income bracket, right? So that money is important for them, right? And they know if they do this well, they are going to get a higher tip. Now, in spite of knowing that they're going to get a higher tip after a 30 to 45 minute kind of interaction with the customer, and they don't even interact for 30 to 45 minutes, but that's the entire probably stay of the customer in the restaurant, it is going to lead to a higher tip. Yet you have so many waiters that don't treat the customer well, right, in spite of knowing that they're going to get a higher tip. Now, if the waiter treats the customer well, let's look at the win-win that happens, right? That the customer is happy, the waiter is happy, the restaurant is happy, right? This is a win-win for everyone. Right now, when he doesn't kind of serve the customer well, doesn't do a good job, customer is not happy, waiter doesn't get a higher tip, restaurant is not happy, right? And therefore, I think for each one of us, it's extremely important to give great customer service to create that win-win for everyone, right? So when we were creating this content, I shared this point with Arunima, and Arunima had a good question saying, this seems so logical, so why wouldn't a waiter do it, right? And it seems so logical, but why a waiter wouldn't do it is a lot of these things are kind of simple, right? There's no doubt that they're simple, but they're not easy to do, right? Because you need to do it all the time, every day, right? So the concept is simple, but it's not easy to put into action. And just telling her, right, that there's so many problems that the waiter could be in mentally, right, that doesn't end up doing that. Now, it doesn't help him, and he needs to in a way rise above the occasion for him to be able to do that. But for so many people, they just can't do that, and therefore they can't make the added money, and then their life keeps going in that same negative downward spiral in a way, right? But if he can lift himself up by saying that, okay, I know I have a bad situation at home, but I'm going to come and do excellent customer service, make that extra money, right, and do that. So that would really help someone, right? And that's the difference between people in the end. Okay. So, okay, think of the service that you have received in the past as a customer and list an example of when you have faced an average moment of truth, a moment of misery, and a moment of magic, right? Pause the video here, make a note of your answers, and you'll have to discuss the examples with your coach during the live online class, right? So ensure that you pause here and make a note of these answers. Okay. Now, in terms of handling customer interactions, like I told you, we've just focused on the interaction part. Beyond this, there's your general communication mantras. They're dealing with angry, irritated customer and saying no, right? Now, this saying no topic we've already covered. So we're just doing a quick recap here. We're not really getting into those many details, but these are the two things that we're going to focus on, right? So now, your customer communication mantras. Okay, now what's the first thing that you need to focus on when you're dealing with customers? And that is being courteous. Okay, the other way of looking at courteous is being polite with the customers. I think for me, when you're interacting with the customer, that is the first and most important thing that you need to do. I can't think of anything which is more important than courtesy when you're interacting with customers. So this includes these three things, and we'll tell you a little more about them, right? So the first thing that you need to do is start and end your interactions on a positive note, right? Start every interaction with a smile and a positive greeting. A customer can determine if you're willing to help them or not within the first 7 seconds of interacting with you. And I think in another class I have spoken about this, but this is a point that is worth kind of re-mentioning to you, right? So a customer or any person makes an impression of whether or not you want to help them within the first 7 to 10 seconds of dealing with you, right? In the first 7 to 10 seconds of dealing with you, if you give them an impression that you don't want to help them, and then if you say no to them for something, or you cannot adhere to a request that they have, the customer ends up thinking that this guy wanted to say no to me or not help me right from the start, right? I could tell from the first 5 to 7 interaction only that this person didn't want to help me, so he's saying no to me, right? That's what happens in the customer's head. On the other side, if you start a customer interaction extremely positively during the first 7 to 10 seconds, you do it extremely well, the customer, even if you can't help him, then ends up thinking that, hey, this person started the interaction so well, he's really keen on helping me. There must be a genuine problem, or there must be a genuine reason why he can't adhere to what I want or do what I want, right? And it all depends on the first 7 to 10 seconds, right? And so, if you're physically present with the customer, your body language plays such a big role, you smiling plays such a big role, a positive greeting at the start plays such a big role, right? And as a matter of fact, this is not just true when you're coming with, when you're dealing with customers in any situation. The first to 7 seconds interactions is so important, because people make their impressions based on that, right? Now, regardless of how the interaction went, close on a pleasant note, right? So that becomes very, very important, because in the end, you need to understand that your customer is not your friend, right? It's a customer, right? And irrespective of how that interaction is gone, you need to try to end that interaction on a positive note. So start positive, end positive, for sure. Really concentrate on those two things. Stop emotional leakage. Restart or start afresh with every customer. Right now, again, this is so important to understand, right? So let's assume that a person has, I'm just taking 10 here, right? So let's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So let's assume these are the 10 interactions that you have with a customer. Right now, the third customer doesn't know how your interaction went with the second customer. The fourth customer doesn't care how your interaction has gone with the third customer, right? The 10th customer doesn't know what happened with the sixth customer, right? They have no idea of what happened to them. Now, what happens in a lot of cases is, you have one bad interaction with a customer, and you carry on, do emotional leakage. Then you carry forward that same mood, right, of this bad interaction to the next customer and the next customer and the next customer. And he doesn't care that you had a bad interaction here with somebody, right? He's got nothing to do with that. And therefore, when you're dealing with customers, you need to have a simple rule: whether the interaction with the previous customer has gone well or not, you restart yourself for every conversation, you restart yourself for every communication that you have with the customer, and you start positively. That's exactly like a button that you press with for every interaction that is there. And having that logic really helps, right? Because if you let the emotional leakage happen, you're going to carry forward that. And as a matter of fact, emotional leakage also means that you could have had a bad start to your morning with some family member of your. You could have gotten into a quarrel, a fight, or something could have happened at home. But when you get started with your customer interaction, there shouldn't be anything there that you bring into these interactions, right? I often tell people, cricket is going on right now, so you don't care whether Ajinkya Rane has had a fight with his wife in the morning or not, right? Of the match. You don't care about it. You say, listen, whether you had a fight with your wife or not is your problem. When you come on the field, please play well. Right? That's really what we want, for you to play well in that match. We don't care what's happening in your personal life, right? And that's exactly, the customer shouldn't care that you're having a problem with your personal life or a previous interaction, right? And of course, groom and dress well, because again, in the first 7 seconds, that makes a big impression for people if you're groomed well. Okay, 68% of customers believe that the key to great customer service is a polite customer service representative, right? I would have imagined that number is way higher. uh, can you see the screen, Arunima?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, Arunima, you want to share something?
Yes, regarding point number one,
Yeah.
so I'm not a coffee. I'm not a coffee.
Yeah.
I don't know what the word,
Yeah.
but I love going to Starbucks because the moment I enter
Yeah.
Starbucks, the
Yeah.
way they greet every customer,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like with a loud and a very happy,
Yeah.
enthusiastic
Yeah.
welcome or hi or anything it could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was one that I would visit quite often in BKC, and
Yeah.
I would visit it almost every day. So then they started greeting me personally. So they would
Mm,
say, "Hi, Arunima," and it would be so loud that the whole store can hear it. But it just makes you feel so special. It just makes you, if you had a bad day, somehow for me, it was because it was often after college or before college, and I'd be either grumpy or just in some weird mood, and it would just make me feel so good.
Mm.
Again, I would be willing to pay those 200 rupees for coffee, because that interaction, that sorry, the greeting was just, it put a smile on my face.
Yeah,
So I thought
yeah.
I'd,
Absolutely. So yeah, I didn't start the class by speaking about this, but I often tell people that the word customer service, the word service comes from serve, right?
mm,
Serving people, and I think there's nothing more noble than serving people or being of help to people. Right now,
correct,
when you serve people and you're not paid for it, that's called being a volunteer, right?
correct,
Like people that have been that are called angels, like Mother Teresa, right? Why are they called angels? Because they actually went about serving people without getting anything back in terms of in terms of money or anything back, right? They just served people, right? Here each and every person has a chance to serve people for a living, where they're making
correct,
money of it, right? So when you need to serve people and you're also making money of it, do it well, right? So that's one aspect of it. Two, I often share this thing of, what does it mean to be a good human being, right? A good human being is the only way to define a good human being is how you interact with other human beings. It's literally that simple, right? You can't
right,
be a good or bad human being in isolation. You can be a good human being depending on how you treat other human beings, right? Now, when it comes to customer service, you have the opportunity to treat another human being well, right? And if you believe in karma, if you believe in anything, so if you want to be a good person, serve your people that you interact
correct,
with well, right? If you believe in karma, please serve your customers well, right? Because you and me both know that when you went into the Starbucks, you were like, you felt good about those people, and that's called dua dena, right? In a way that it's a blessing of sort. They're like, oh, thank you, you're happy for that interaction, right? If you're a
correct.
slightly older person, probably our parents generation, that's what they would call it. They say, oh, bless you. That's what my mother says, right? so
Mm-hmm.
so if she goes to a bank and somebody helps you, she literally says, God bless you, right? So if you're a
Right,
religious person, if you're somebody that is a believer, it's that simple, right? These are the human beings that you're interacting with. Ensure that you get
correct,
their blessings by just interacting with them damn well. And you'll feel good at the end of the day, right? That you put a smile on
correct.
somebody else's face, that you help somebody out. And so there's just so many reasons for a person to interact with another person well, right? And do it well.
Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, great, thank you for sharing that. Right now, use the right tone of voice. Of course, we've had literally a whole class on this thing, right? So I'm not going to get into the details of this, but your tone of voice says a lot about your intent to help the customer. Your tone is, of course, the emotion, feelings expressed through words. Most During most customer interaction, ensure that your tone is polite, friendly, amicable, energetic, enthusiastic, passionate, genuine, authentic, real, and confident when you're speaking to them, right? So this is the kind of tone of voice that you must have, because the tone of voice just says so much about your ability to them, right? So control your tone of voice, speak in that good tone of voice, which are these tones of voice. And that's how good customer service must be, right? While apologizing or empathizing with the customers, your voice, your tone again should reflect the same, right? And the third is use positive language, right? So you said, start with courtesy is important. Start end your interactions on a positive note. Ensure that your body language is good. Ensure that you have a smile on your face. Ensure that you're dressed well. Ensure that the tone of voice is right, and ensure that you're using positive language, right? Use words and phrases like definitely, certainly, absolutely, I'll do my best, right? So these words that really build confidence in your customer. In a way, recast negative information in a positive light. So something like, okay, example, I can't get you that product until next month, it is back ordered and unavailable at that time, versus that product will be available next month, I can place the order for you right now and make sure that it's sent to you as soon as it reaches our warehouse, right? So it's uh, instead of saying, no, I can't do this for you right now, you can say, yes, I can do this for you in a week, right? That's a simple way of recasting negative information in a positive way. Instead of saying can't, you say, I can. I can't process this for you, versus saying, I can process this for you if you just give me these two documents, right? So I can do it for you versus saying I can't, right? So that's a good way of recasting information, and add a friendly touch to your communication. Don't be too friendly, but address customers by their name. Ask them how they're doing. Make a little bit of small talk if it's possible. So ensure that you do that to build the relationship, right? So the first thing in your interaction starts with being courteous. In my opinion, there's nothing more important than that in customer interaction, right? Now, number two, you had a whole class on this, so I'm not getting into the details of this, but be 100% committed to the process of listening to the customer attentively. Never interrupt a customer. Okay, don't multitask when you're interacting with the customer. We've done all of this in that class, so I'm not going to repeat this. Ensure that you make notes while you're interacting with a customer, again, because you don't want the customer to be repeating themselves. When you make notes, it's easy for you to respond to the customer in a point wise manner, right? Where you say, okay, these are your three concerns, let me address concern one. That can only happen when you make notes, right? It's not possible for you to do that. Be responsive. Use non-verbal responses such as reflecting the right facial expression, nodding your head, maintaining eye contact. Give verbal responses when you're there. And of course, listen to understand the customer, not to reply to him or her, right? So ensure that you do it. You had a whole 90-minute class on this thing. So I'm not going to get into the detail, but just for you to know, start with courtesy being important. Then it's extremely important for you to listen well, right? Now, the third one is demonstrate responsiveness and proactiveness in your communication with them, right? So keep customers proactively informed of the status of the request or query. Don't inform only when they ask you or follow up, right? So keep them proactively informed of the status. Reflect the customer urgency which is there, and acknowledge a waiting customer query. If you can't resolve the customer immediately, at least let the customer know when the issue has been acknowledged, and you're going to do it right. Now, just a simple thing here. If you have committed to the customer that a certain delivery is going to happen on the 20th of Jan, right? And you realize by the 15th of Jan that this delivery now is going to happen on the 22nd of Jan, right? That's what you realize. Don't wait till the 20th to inform the customer. Don't just keep quiet about it and say, yeah, he may forget about it. As soon as you realize that there is going to be a delay in this delivery, right? Inform the customer proactively about the same, right? So that's something that you need to do, right? That makes sense. So that's what proactive information means. Okay, now communicate in a precise manner. Again, you've done a 90-minute class here on this thing on specific clear communication. um, for example, I will get back to you as soon as possible versus I will get back to you at 5 p.m, right? This is what specific communication is, and that's what you need to do. And communicate as simply as possible. Do not use jargon when interacting with a customer. If you must use jargon, you can find a better alternative explaining its meaning to the customer, right? So use common language where possible. Do not use your what is jargon. Jargon is nothing but technical words or internal words that you may use. Ensure that you're not doing it, because so many people I've seen that use their internal jargon with the customer, which confuses the customer, right? Again, you had a whole 90-minute class on this, so I'm not getting into the details. Yes, Arunima, come in, please.
Yeah, I just like to add one thing regarding point number A.
Mm,
I read that customers, if you
mm,
give them a range or
yeah,
you give them an unspecific sort of
yeah,
commitment, which is will take 5 to 7 days to make
yeah,
this happen, or
yeah,
I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
yeah,
Customers are often they would believe the best case scenario. So when you say 5 to 7 days,
yeah,
they think that okay, in 5 days I'll get a response. Or if you
yeah,
say that I'll get back to you as soon as possible, they assume that as soon as possible literally means in the next 5 minutes, in the next
yeah,
half an hour.
yeah,
So that's the danger of again communicating in a unspecific manner, because your customer will assume that they'll take the shorter timeline, or
yeah,
they'll sort of assume the best case scenario.
yeah,
So one thing that you should be careful of is, of course, be very specific. So if you know that 5 to 7 days will take 7 days,
yeah,
say 7 days. Don't
yeah,
take 5 to 7 days, because
yeah,
if you can deliver earlier, you'll create a moment of delight, but
yeah,
a moment of magic. Sorry, but so try to get a buy-in for the worst case scenario and be very specific
correct.
in your language. So this is something I thought
I think
we
that's
should
very, it's a
mention
very,
here.
very nice point. Very, very nice point, right? Now, the fifth point is be reliable. So stick to your commitments, revert at the time that you promised. If you want to be reliable, you need to also be honest and transparent, right, with the customer. So provide correct and complete information, make realistic promises, tell the customer what they need to know, whether it's good or bad news, but tell them when they need to know it. If you make a mistake, admit it to the customer. When a customer asks for something outside the scope of what you can realistically provide, be upfront about it if you can't do it, and give your honest opinions on stuff, right? So that is something which is very important. Right now, when you are interacting with the customer, um, just a very simple kind of rule which you need to keep in mind is that, and actually this is not just while interacting with the customer, in any business interactions, I think trust is literally the number one most important thing when it comes to business interactions, right? And trust comes from you being reliable, right? If you're not reliable, then trust is not going to happen, which means that if you're not the kind of person that sticks to their commitments, people are not going to rely on you. They're not going to trust you. They say you just say something but you don't kind of follow up on that, right? If you're not honest and transparent, and this is just, if the customer feels that you don't provide correct information and complete information, right, they're going to stop trusting you. They're not going to think you're reliable, right? And that impacts then everything in that interaction, and that also impacts how they look at the brand in the end, right? So just being reliable and doing these things that have been mentioned on this slide are kind of so important for you, if you want to come across as reliable and really gain the trust of your customer, right? And share knowledges around the processes that you require right now. So those are the five things that you need to keep in mind as far as customer interactions are concerned. Now these are kind of some of the other things that you need to keep in mind, right? So take ownership. So get to the bottom of an issue. Take something from start to finish. So don't, if you're dealing with a customer issue, don't just leave it halfway through. Ensure that you take it to the finish mark. Don't bounce the customer from person to person, right? So if the customer comes to you, don't just say now go to this person and that person says go to somebody else. Don't do that, and really treat the customer like your own. Okay, second point, exceed expectations. So at all points of time, we discussed this at the start, try to delight the customer in all situations. Is it always possible? No. But what the customer remembers always is the delightful experiences. He's never gonna remember the dissatisfied ones. He'll remember the delighted ones. He'll rarely remember the satisfied ones, right? So if you want him to really remember them, you need to go the extra mile and try to do something for them. And when you go the extra mile, that helps you, because the customer tries to repay you if you do something extra for them, in the form of giving you more business, in the form of giving you more giving you more references, sending an appreciation note to you, or kind of forgiving you when you make a mistake, right? So this is the way the customer finds to repay you if you go the extra mile to them. Show appreciation to the customer. The reward long-term customers with loyalty discount programs if possible. Give away some branded items. So and even it could be verbal appreciation, right? If your customer deals with you well, ensure that you tell him that I'm really grateful for the way you have dealt with me during this whole time, right? So be appreciative in words, and if there's anything else that you can give him. The fourth point, of course, is build strong product and process knowledge, right? So if you want to, like we discussed the example of the nurse, right? However courteous a nurse may be, but if she doesn't know her stuff, the patient and their family is going to be wary about that nurse. They're going to be like, hey, you're a nice person but you don't know your stuff, right? So that becomes a problem. On the other side, when you when you're interacting with customers, people are very good at telling if you know your stuff or not, because if you don't know your stuff, you're not going to communicate with the customer with confidence. And the minute you don't communicate with the customer with confidence, the customer is likely to say, let me talk to your boss, right? Because you don't seem to know your product or process right well enough, but I'm assuming your boss does, so let me speak to your boss, right? That's likely to happen. So at all points of time, understand your product, your processes, have that knowledge with you. That will help you communicate confidently. And of course, the fifth point is ask for feedback. provide ways for customers to give you feedback. Feedback helps you hone customer specific needs so that you can find the best solutions to their problems, and listen to the comments and respond promptly, whether it's a compliment or complaint, right? So take customer feedback so that you can improve on the experience, understand their expectations better as an individual, and also understand the expectations maybe of people at large, right? So again, that's something that you can do. So these are just 5 other points that are not in the communication part per se, but just things that are important from a customer service point of view. Right now, reflection zone, pause the lecture here and think of the 3 to 5 takeaways from this section. Ensure your takeaways are in the form of specific and implementable action points, right? So really think through your takeaways after pausing, and when you take your takeaways, ensure that you have a discussion with your coach on them, and let's see whether that ends up helping, right? Okay. Now, dealing with angry customers or irritated customers, again, this is a very important part of interacting with the customer. Like Bill Gates said, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning, right? So let's see how we need to deal with these customers. When dealing with an angry customer, you don't make matters worse by, of course, arguing with the customer, passing the buck to somebody else, blaming your own organization, right? Making stupid or lame excuses, taking it personally, right? A lot of people end up doing that, or ignoring or belittling the issue that the customer is angry about, right? So you don't want to do any of these things at all, right? Because it doesn't help when you do it. Okay. Taking something personally when a customer is angry is one of the worst things to do, right? Because the customer is not necessarily upset with you. He's upset with the brand, right? That he's upset with the company, and he can't go and of course shout at a or get irritated at the board of the company, right? He can't do that outside the office. He needs to have a human being that he's doing that with you, and that human being happens to be you, right? So there's absolutely no point taking it personally in any way when you're dealing with a customer. And like we said, customers can have such different expectations, right, of you. So just to give you an example, we discussed the Holiday Inn room, right? Now let's assume that the Holiday Inn room is 8,000 rupees a night, and let's assume that the Leela room is 15,000 rupees a night. You would say that it's quite stupid for somebody to expect the Leela room in the Holiday room because he's paying half the price for it, right? But that doesn't stop customers from having expectations, right? You may think that it is logical, but they could still have expectations. Now, if the customer gets upset with you, the person at Holiday Inn, for that room, you can't take that personally, right? Because you don't know what has triggered, irritated that customer, that is led to him behaving in a certain way. So that's the last thing that you do. But that's not to say that you tolerate abuse from the customer, verbal abuse or anything of that sort. At that point of time, you can be assertive and ask the customer to step back, and they will in most cases. In most company situations, if you're on the phone, you can ask the customer to be careful about the language that they're using if they are kind of verbally abusive. And then beyond the point, there people are just asked to hang up if the customer is abusive, right? So those are the real extreme cases. We're not even talking about them in this section. But yeah, but no point taking it personally, right? That's the larger point. Yes, Arunima, come in.
Yeah. So when you mentioned taking it personally, there was a
Yeah,
question I wanted to ask
yeah,
earlier, but I
yeah,
forgot.
yeah,
When you talked about starting afresh with every
yeah,
customer,
yeah, yeah,
right now, in my situation where I do maybe 2 calls in a day, I
yeah,
can, if I had a bad call in the morning, I
yeah,
can take some time to recover. And then my second call will go better because I can stop emotional leakage. I have
yeah,
time to recover from it.
yeah,
When you have people in who work in call centers or phone banking where they
yeah,
have back to back calls,
yeah,
if they deal with a call which is, the customer is extremely rude, it was a very difficult call to handle it because the
yeah.
customer is yelling, and right after that you need to sort of move on to the next call. In such situations, how would you advise someone that you start fresh, because it's very difficult for a human to just put that experience aside and completely start anew with someone else? So what would you
Correct.
recommend?
Correct. Again, let me start by saying that it's difficult, right? So let me
Hmm.
start by mentioning that. So however much I may say that, oh, you need to do it, it's not that easy to do, because any kind of kind of not false, but any kind of a bad interaction with any human being, whether it's a customer
Right.
or anyone else, always leaves a kind of bad taste in your mouth, right? So there's no kind
Correct.
of doubt about the fact that that's going to happen. But that's what good training is about. That's what good
Mm-hmm.
awareness is about. That's what good, being conscious is about, right? That you need
Correct.
to think about the way you're thinking, and you need to know that, hey, this happened. Now, am I going to let this interaction impact the rest of my day? Right? Am I going to make
Right.
the rest of my day foul because of one foul interaction? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that requires a certain amount of awareness, consciousness, and maturity more than anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what
Mm-hmm.
happens is then we very often, because I've done so much of this training, you'll take and you'll blame that customer, and I'm like, hey, stop blaming that customer. You are to blame,
Mm.
right? You are to
Correct.
blame because you don't have the maturity to do it. So is it easy to do? Definitely not. But that's often the difference between people that end up doing their jobs well and people that don't
Right.
end up doing their jobs well, right? And that's why
Right.
I think, and that's the reason why I came up with that term restart, right? So good or bad interaction, it doesn't matter. You could have a fantastic interaction, you could have an average interaction, a bad interaction. Everyone you need to
Mm.
restart. And the way to restart is in a way a fake yet very positive for 7
Right.
to 10 seconds, right? So you need to train yourself for those 7 to 10 seconds to be extremely positive, because when you start on that positive, it helps the rest of the interaction as well,
Correct.
right?
Fair enough.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So now the three-step process of handling angry or irritated customers. Number one, help the customer empty the cup. Number two, shift to solution mode. And number three, close that interaction pleasantly. Right now, what does this mean? Help the customer empty the cup. Right now, if you deal with customers and a customer is angry, literally think of it as emptying their cup. And the only way they can empty their cup if they end up venting out their irritation, frustration, the matter at hand to you, right? So that means they need to get it out of their system before they can hear you out on the other side, right? And that's what demonstrating active listening means. So your job, if the customer is irritated, is first listen, listen, listen. That's all you're supposed to do. Listen without interrupting and listen with empathy, right? um, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, if there is one trick that you can use when you're doing this, but you need to know how to do this, because listening is very important. So when a customer is angry and the customer is telling you something over the phone or in person, one trick is that you can say, sir, I'm sorry, I know you're sharing this, just give me a minute, I want to get my notepad and I want to make notes of what you're saying, because I don't want you to repeat yourself, right? This is a hack that you can use, right? And if you say, okay, I don't want you to repeat yourself, I need to make notes, it becomes very difficult for a person to shout at you or be upset or angry with you, when you're making notes about something, right? So immediately their voice, their kind of way of talking, everything kind of tempers down because you're making notes, right? And especially if they're physically in front of you, or the phone also, it will happen, but they're in front of you. So of course, listen, listen, listen without interrupting. But the one trick that you can use is say that I'm making notes, so just let me get my notepad, take a 30 seconds gap. That will help the customer cool down, say yes, and now tell me, right? And we've seen that, boom, there's a drop in their temper, and that really helps conduct the rest of the conversation well. So say, I need to sir, give me a minute, let me just get a notepad and let me get a pen, so that I can make notes of what you're saying, so you don't need to repeat yourself again, right? That's the line to use. Now, the other thing to do, of course, and this is the second point, is what you can do when you are in front of the customer, right? When the customer is physically with you in a post COVID world, right? Break their flow with extra courtesy, right? So if the customer is really angry with you, upset about something, and he's firing you, just say that, sir, just a minute, would you like something to drink, right? And he said, no, no, I don't want anything to say. Are you sure? Let me get you a coffee. Let me get you some tea, right? He said, no, no, no. Are you sure, sir? He says, okay, get me a coffee, right? So he said, give me a minute, right? And then go, you get that coffee, tea, whatever it is. If it's a room, step out of that room and you get that coffee, tea, whatever it is yourself. Because, by the time you go outside, get the tea and come back in, don't take too long, because that will irritate him again. But that process again will help him, cool down. And the minute you show that extra courtesy to him, by getting a snack, getting something to drink, again, it's very difficult for you to be angry with somebody that's being courteous with you, right? So that's another way in which you can quickly bring their temper in control, right? This is going to work 8 out of 10 times. It doesn't work in every situation. Of course, see, acknowledge the problem that the customer has, right? Don't And by acknowledge, we mean, it can't seem that you're being dismissive of the problem, right? That the customer has. You need to, if the customer thinks a certain problem is important, you need to kind of think that problem is important as well, right? And I just want to go back to listen with empathy. We have discussed this in our listening class, but your facial expression when you're listening is so important, especially with an angry customer, right? Because if the customer is angry, he'll have an angry expression on his face, and if you have a blank expression on your face, he's going to get all the more angry, right? So when he is communicating his anger or upsetness, you need to have a face of being concerned about that, right? And the minute you have that kind of face of being concerned, that's good listening. That is empathetic listening in his mind, right? Now, the next one, apologize, right? So I think, listening and apologizing are the two most important things that you can do when a customer is angry. And again, apologizing is something that people don't understand, right? So, um, if you go for a funeral of a family friend, right? And if you meet that person, you will say, hey, I'm sorry for your loss, right? So that's, you say, I'm sorry for your loss, right? Because you say I'm sorry for your loss doesn't mean that you killed that person who's dead, right? You're not responsible for that, you're dead. You're using the sorry, or you're using that sorry to say, I'm feeling bad for this situation, right? So similarly, of course, if you or your company is clearly at fault in that situation, you can apologize, in a way where you admit your fault, saying that, hey, this is clearly a mistake that has happened from our end, and I apologize for it. But there will be those in between situations where you may not even know whether your company, or some your colleague or somebody is actually at fault or not. But you can always say, hey, I'm sorry for the trouble that is being caused to you, right? So you can say, I'm feeling bad for the pain that you have to go through, or the trouble that you have to go through. You don't really know whether it's your company's or your colleague's fault in that situation. But the minute you kind of apologize and you say that sorry, the customer tends to cool down, and that's what you want to do in step one, right? You want him to empty his cup, you want him to cool down. And of course, in situations where, there are other customers around, you want to kind of separate him out, right? Because one kind of furious customer, one angry customer is going to set fire to all the other customers around there, right? So if you're in the same physical space and you have the opportunity to say, come sit in a room, or come, like, let's kind of separate you out there, that's something that you should do as well, right? If you're in that kind of a situation. Now, number two, so once you're done with him emptying his cup, where he's cooled down a little, gently shift towards solution mode, right? So steer the customer towards problem solving. Now, typically, when the customer is upset, he will tend to bring up in that particular conversation a lot of past unrelated problems that he has, right, connected to it. So he has a problem, say, with the checkbook, some checkbook related, but he'll then start telling you stories of what happened 4 years back, 5 years back, and he'll keep going on about that. Right now, if you're good at dealing with an angry customer, you listen to all those things very well, but you keep bringing him back to the current problem at hand, because he's telling you a lot of those other things just to remove his frustrations. You can't digress yourself by asking questions around those other issues, or trying to get into those other issues, right? You just want to nod, you just want to kind of, you just want to listen to him, no doubt, because you don't want to cut him off because you're trying to empty his cup. But after that is over, you keep getting back to the current issue which is there at hand. Now, sure, if he has some pending issue connected to your company that you can help him out with, solve the first issue first, and then go to that issue second and try to solve that, right? But don't mix up these issues, because he's bringing so many issues up at this time that will confuse the customer, that will confuse you, and there'll be no resolution that is met at the end, right? So you don't want to do that. Now, very often when the customer is angry, we don't ask questions, we don't clarify the issue, right? And it becomes an even bigger mess, because we're so scared at that point of time to ask questions. But you need to know is, the only way that you can solve a customer issue is when you fully understand it, right? And a problem understood is half the problem solved, right? So after receiving all the information, check if the additional information details are required to solve the query, right? So get all those information. Don't be one of those people that gets scared and doesn't ask information, doesn't get the clarity that is required, because that's a big mistake people make. And of course, reconfirm your understanding of the problem. Right now, here, in terms of asking questions, often the customer will end up saying, oh, but I told you about this before, or I told your colleague about this before, I've said this 1 month back when I told you about it. So you'll put a lot of that pressure, because the customer doesn't want to repeat themselves in a lot of cases. Right now, if there's no way for you to garner that information, the only way you can do it is to say, I'm really sorry, but I need this information so that I can solve this immediately for you. Right, so don't get scared in that situation. And if you've done the first part well, because you let him empty the cup, he's going to be a lot more tolerant of you during this stage. Right now, then tell the customer what you will do. Offer multiple solutions if possible. Inform the customer if the customer to the inform and explain to the customer the actions taken by you to resolve the issue. If possible, offer alternatives. Solve the issue, which means if you can give, when a customer is angry, more often than not he wants an issue to be resolved immediately. So in any way, if you can resolve that issue immediately, please go about resolving that issue immediately for him. Right, if you can't go about resolving the issue immediately, at least inform him of all the steps that you've taken for that issue to get resolved. Right, in case you need time to resolve the query, inform the customers exactly how long you will take, and provide a complete solution looking at the causes and problems, and ensure all loopholes have been fixed. Right, so that's what you want to do. You want to first, like the previous slide was about, getting to the bottom of the issue, being completely clear as to what the issue is, not getting scared. Then this is about trying to solve the issue immediately if you can. If not, at least inform him for all the steps that you've taken, inform him where it will get sorted, really getting into the bottom of that, so it happens this time and it's not forgotten again. Right, okay. And the last part here is close pleasantly. Right, so in the end, confirm whether the issue is resolved, clarify if the actions taken by you have are as per his satisfaction, confirm if there is anything else the customer needs assistance with. Right, so this is a very important step. Right, so you resolve the current issue. After you resolve that, you ask him, yes sir, now tell me, is there anything else I can help you out with? Right, so that's the line that you're supposed to use. So if a lot of those issues that he was speaking about earlier are genuine, this is the time that he's going to bring them up. Right, and if there are no other issues, he'll say, no, 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 I don't have any issues, other issues, thank you very much, because you resolve the current one, and you're asking him, saying that, is there anything else I can do? So that shows the attitude that you want to still help him out at this point of time. And if you've taken time to resolve the issue, proactively follow up with the customer to confirm the problem is taken care of. Right, so if you say, this is going to get resolved by the 20th of Jan, on the 20th of Jan, ensure that you call the customer and really check whether that issue is confirmed or not. This is what will lead to delight, by the way. Right, and I have to tell you about the service paradox at the end of this thing, right, of what the service paradox means, which is very interesting. Right, now, here you asked him, saying, yes, sir, is there anything else I can do for you? Is there anything else I can help you out with? And he says, no, 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 thank you very much. Then when he's leaving, right, and this is your litmus test of whether you've done a good job or not with an angry customer. When he's leaving, again, apologize once again. You say, sir, once again, I'd like to apologize to you for the inconvenience that has been caused, for the trouble that is caused for you. Right, now, if you did a good job in terms of handling the customer at this point of time, this customer will say, no, 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 actually I don't have a problem with you, and this has happened, and thank you for resolving it. So when you kind of apologize again, that's when you'll know, if the customer says this to you, no, no, I don't have a problem with you, you're doing a good job, but this has happened, that means that you've done a good job of dealing with that customer, right, in an angry state. And of course, then when he's leaving, thank him for the patience that he's had. Right, so this is your technique of kind of closing pleasantly, where clarify the actions taken as satisfaction, ask him if there's any other assistance that he needs, apologize once again, and then thank him at the end. Right, and if you do it, your customer will be extremely happy when you leave him. Okay, which brings me to a concept which is called the service paradox. Right, so the service paradox means that if you, as a customer, if you have a problem with a certain product or service, And if you get great customer service when you have that product, when you have that problem, you are likely to rate that brand much higher than you would have if that problem didn't occur, right? So in a way, the problem itself can be a blessing in disguise for you if you deal with that customer well. Right, now let me give you an example. Let's assume that you have a Samsung TV that you bought, right? Now, if nothing goes wrong with that Samsung TV, you will never talk about it. Okay, because you got the TV, nothing went wrong with it. Great, it's there at home, right? You won't really talk about it. There's no word of mouth. Okay, now let's assume that something goes wrong with the Samsung TV, right? And great service is given to you, right? So they deal with you brilliantly and give you great service for this Samsung TV that something went wrong with, right? You call, they immediately get over, no hassle, no nothing. You will really start talking about this positively to your friends and family, saying, oh, you must buy a Samsung TV. It's such, great service. I had a problem, they resolved it so well, right? Now, if the problem didn't happen, you're never going to talk about it. But if a problem happens and if it's dealt with excellently, it creates great word of mouth. And that's what the service paradox means, right? The customer satisfaction of you will be much higher if there's a problem that happens and you serve it well, as against that problem not happening at all, right? Because then you don't really have much of an opinion to you. And that's how literally every problem that comes up can be looked at as a blessing in disguise and as an opportunity to delight the customer through the service that you give them, right? So that's a very interesting and important concept in dealing with customers. Right, now, part 3, we're not getting into the detail here because we've had an entire class that has been done on this, but a quick recap. Sandwich your no between two positive statements, which means, you can always start with saying, hey, I understand that it's your daughter's wedding. I understand that you need this checkbook immediately. I get that because you need to make the payments. However, at this point of time, it's not possible for me to give you that checkbook immediately because it comes from some other office of ours. However, I will give you these kind of options which I have, right? So you start with something positive, then say a no, and try to end with something positive as well, right? Give proactive explanations, which means every time you say no to a customer, the first thing that pops up in their mind is why. So don't wait for the customer to ask you why. Proactively tell him the facts, rules, regulations as to why you're saying no to him without him asking. Always when you say no, give an alternative to the customer. As far as possible, give more than one alternative, right? So literally force yourself in your brain to give alternatives to your customer when you're saying no. If a customer still doesn't agree and still wants something, you need to show visible efforts, exactly like the case Arunima spoke about, where the person could say, okay, I don't think I can do anything, but let me check on, let me speak to my seniors, let me check my rules, let me see whether I can extend some boundary to help you out. Go back, check. If you can't still do it, proactively call the customer and tell him, hey, I checked, I couldn't do it. So that shows some kind of a visible effort from your side. Number 5, be solution centric, which means ensure that you're at all points of time you are looking for solutions that you can give the customer, versus being problem centric there, right? So always look at what solution that you can give him versus the problem. Frame your no and explanation in a way where the customer feels compelled to take back their request, right? So this is connected to the point that we discussed earlier in terms of reframing negative to positive, right? Where you can say, I can't do this for you because I can't go ahead with this thing because there are certain security risks that are there in this, right? Now the only way I can possibly give it to you is if you give it to me in writing, saying that you're okay with a breach of security that may happen to your account or something like that. If you're okay with that, if you can send me that in writing, I can show it to my boss and consider it, right? And then the person will be like, I can't give something like that in writing to you, right? That I'm okay with the security breach. And you say, so then it's not going to be possible for me to do it, right? Because there is certain security issues as far as this is concerned, right? So these are smart ways in which you can frame your no, an explanation in a way where the person itself feels compelled to take it back, right? and this can be done in different ways, right? So if you're saying no to somebody, says, "Sir, I can definitely do this for you, but this is something that's going to take an additional cost," right? And if you're ready to pay that additional cost to it because it's way beyond the scope of what we've done, we'll be glad to do it for you. We'll definitely do it for you, right? So of course the client, depending on the situation, may or may not agree to that, but again, this is a way of putting that across to you. And in the end, the polite wall, right? So repeat your message repeatedly until the person understand that you will not change your mind, right? So when you know certain things that can't be done and yet a customer is pushing for it, you need to just be a polite wall where you say the same thing again and again, where you say, "Yes sir, I understand, but there's nothing that I can do about it." He says, "Yeah." You say, "Yes sir, I totally get it. I know this is trouble for you, but there's genuinely nothing I can do." You can, you say, "Yes sir, I know that this is difficult. I really wish I could do something, but there's nothing," right? So maintain your polite kind of, it's called polite wall because you're supposed to maintain your politeness while talking to you, but you continuously in a way defend that customer request. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, the customer realizes that you genuinely can't do anything about it, right? So just to kind of end this thing, I often, while teaching people this subject, I tell them that, say, the customer has his expectations, you will have your own rules plus boundaries of what you can do, right? And great customer service is about dealing with these two things. You need to know, where you can extend these rules and boundaries and kind of meet those customer expectations, right? And when these two things end up meeting midpoint somewhere, that's where good customer service happens, right? Because it's not like you can do anything and everything for the customer. That's not possible for you to do, because you will have your own regulations and boundaries to deal with, right? And this thing that you do in the middle, is that's why you need to be adept at dealing with customers. You need to be well trained to deal with customers, right? When it comes to working in places like banks, insurance companies, and stuff like that, they have lots of rules and regulations, connected to what they're doing. There are tons of them that makes it all the more difficult for them to do it, and therefore their skills in terms of dealing with the customers need to be quite high, right? Okay, with that, we come to an end of this particular session. Pause the session right here and make a note of your 5 biggest takeaways that you're going to have from this session, and of course take them back to your coach and have a discussion on what are the key things that you learned from this session. And of course you're going to do you're going to summarize the content of this lecture, and any doubts that you have, you can kind of deal with the communication coach on this. Arunima, do you have anything to say as we end the session?
No, nothing from my end.
Okay, good. So yeah, to end the session, the only thing that I can say in the end is that knowing how to deal with a customer is extremely important. Your prosperity often depends on your ability to deal with a customer, right? Because if you can deal with an internal or external customer well, that's what all work is. If you do that extremely well, your customers will keep coming back to you, which will end up making you more prosperous, more richer, more wealthier, right? And this is a key skill to learn, right? And a key skill to bring in your life. And if you manage to do that, it is always going to help you. Because the other thing when it comes to customer service is the rules of good customer service are more or less universal in nature. Right. So this is knowledge where you can carry across industries. If you worked in hospitality, you can carry those same principles to a bank. If you worked in a bank and you learn it, you can carry those same principles to a bakery, right? So if you do something well, if you're part of a insurance company, if you learn how to do customer service, and tomorrow you start your own bakery for that matter, you can use the same principles there of doing great customer service, right? So that's the beauty of it. These principles are universal in nature, right? So it's not like they're going to be different in India versus different in any other country. All customers want great service in the end, right? So that's what it is. So this has got to do directly with your prosperity. To So know this subject well, learn this subject well, and let it benefit your life, your customer's life, and your company's life. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.